So we're gonna rewind to college. Your work is trash. The only good way and real way that you write is by writing dialogue only. Welcome back to the crypt. I had a different video planned for today, but nope, we're not doing it. Junk it. We're rolling with something else because I really want to address this. So I know followers fluctuate for a variety of reasons, so who knows what's going on, but I did definitely lose some followers, and it was for my book reviews. Like, that's when I lost a couple followers. So I do want to say that I have like reflected a little bit, like I've looked at the series and I get it. Song of Dryad was the third book I've reviewed in my One Author to Another series, and a third time was not the charm. It just wasn't. And I can totally understand why, if you were to look at that and look at that series, it could come off as I'm just being mean. Like, I could see how someone would come to that conclusion. But I kind of want to share my perspective on feedback and why feedback is so important to me. For me, when I was creating my channel, I had this moment where I was like, okay, what kind of audience do I actually want to build? And especially with One Author to Another series, I was thinking, am I being too harsh? Am I being too mean? And I thought about it and I was like, well, the reality is, like, I'm not saying anything untrue. I truly disliked these parts of these stories. I really didn't connect to this and I had problems with them. So I can't say something super nice about this book because I have critiques for it. But at the same time, like, the only other option is not to say anything at all. But that didn't sit right with me either, because I'm like, well, these are small-time authors. Who's telling these people that these things didn't work? And also, and this is the important thing, which I don't think I've told you guys, but like, I hold my own work to these standards. So all of the notes for things like Song of Dryad, Saber's Champion, the notes of things that didn't work in those stories are notes that I make from my own work to check my own stuff using that. Like, I will check my stuff and be like, okay, so like the crystal thing with Song of Dryad, like, if these crystals are so powerful, why aren't other witches using it? When I look at the magic stuff in my stories, I look for the same, I use that same critiquing method where I'm like, okay, do I have magical items or anything like that that provides an advantage, but the advantage is only working for the main character and it doesn't work for anyone else? Am I pulling that? Because that doesn't work. Because I know it doesn't work because I read a book someone else wrote and it didn't work. It was frustrating to read. So I know it doesn't work for readers. So I shouldn't have it in my books either, right? So I use that same standard that I use in that series on my own work. I do want to reach a point where it is possible for you guys to be beta readers for my stuff. And if that's the case, I want you guys to have the confidence of knowing where my standards are. And you can like know, oh, this author, she holds her work to this standard. So if we see anything that fails that, we need to let her know because, you know, she failed her standard. She needs to, you know, pull her work back up to that standard. I want an audience that's confident enough to call me out on that kind of stuff. And because otherwise there's no way I'll be better. Because I'm in the midst of the creation process, so I don't always objectively see when something doesn't work. I need that feedback. And I kind of want to share like the trial by fire that made me see critique the way I see it today. This was the first time I was writing sci-fi. I was raised on sci-fi. I absolutely adore sci-fi. Even though as a kid I could never remember like the titles of movies for some bizarre reason, but I could remember entire scenes. So when I was a child, I would just come up to my parents and be like, I want to watch giant metal turtles. And my poor parents had to, you know, follow the dots, connect them up, and realize, oh, an ad, is it an AT-AT? Is it Star Wars? Do you want to watch Return of the Jedi? And then I'd be like, no, it's in the snow. In the snow. And they're like, oh, Empire Strikes Back, yes. Even though, to be fair, Return of the Jedi did end up being my favorite because I personally like the Ewoks, the teddy bears in the forest, as I used to call them. Good times. So I always wanted to write it, but I feared writing it when I was younger because I thought I wasn't smart enough to write sci-fi. And then when that course came up in college, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna face my fear. I'm gonna try. I'm gonna try my best. You know, I'm gonna learn so I can do it really, really, really well, right? So I took the course, and so I created my first draft for my very first sci-fi ever. First science fiction I ever wrote, right? And I put it on the website for my classmates to critique. And lo and behold, the first person who critiqued it gave me about 5 or 6 paragraphs telling me how my work was absolute trash and garbage and boring and horrible, and he didn't see the point of what I was writing, and he didn't see the point of any of the characters, and he hated everyone, and how the only way I should write and the only way I could save the thing I had tried to make was I had to go back to the beginning and write dialogue only. And this was the first, I did not know. I would find out later in the class that this guy was a misogynistic, like grade A, just jerk. But I did not know that at the time because it was the beginning of the course, so I didn't know yet. But he attacked all the women in the class this way. He was horrible. I read this critique, which was the first one I was getting for a science fiction, and I thought, I was right. I can't write. Like, I can't write sci-fi. I suck. I'm horrible. So I had a good cry in the bathroom. I read it again and again because I have a fixation problem, so I'll like fixate on something, even if it's something horrible, and I'll just go over it over and over it and beat myself up over it mentally. So about an hour and a half of panic and crying and stuff like that later, I have another classmate that comes in, reviews my work, and gives it stellar stars. It's like, I had a really hard time finding critique for this. It was character driven instead of plot driven. It was so good. The only thing I can critique is like this paragraph here was a little wonky. It was kind of hard to make sense of what you were saying in the description, so could you clean that up a little bit? Also, this sentence here went a little bit long. But he's like, but other than that, man, this was really, really solid read. I really want to see more about this in this world and this character. Was good. And then he responded to my classmate that had ripped me a new one. He was like, dude, what's your problem? No one writes like that. Do you mean playwright? Are you talking about playwrights? This isn't a playwright class, bro. And it made me realize in that moment something that I knew in the back of my head, but for whatever reason I wasn't applying to myself, and that is you have to be able to separate the wheat from the chaff when it comes to critique. And I had to learn the hard way how to do that. So fast forward a couple weeks, and I'm fixing up the story for the second round of drafts. I went back to that horrible, super, super long, just tirade from this troll. I went back in that, and I went through it carefully, and I found something that was usable in there, that wasn't just his personal opinion on how to write, but was actually something that could possibly be useful. It was for a throwaway line about food. He was talking about how like this really took me out of the story because like this is the future, so food will be different. Like he's a scout, right? Like he's in a small ship, like blah, blah, blah. But he was kind of right. Like, yeah, I mean, it's the future setting, so food might be a little different, especially how they would prepare food if you're on a long-term deep space mission. So even though it's a throwaway line in the story, it's still a line that could, if done incorrectly, pull the reader out. So I should tighten that line up. So I cleaned it up, and my teacher noticed. He was like, wow, you even took critique from this really, not so good critique you got. You found something you could use. And I was like, well, yeah, because even if someone was a jerk about it, like if something did take him out of the story, I can probably still at least tighten that part of the story up. I might not change it entirely, but I can at least make it tighter so it actually works a lot better. And you can't always do that. Sometimes people will give you critique that's just useless because it's pretty much like, your work is stupid, and then they leave. That you can't get anything out of that. Some things are just going to be bias, and they're just going to be personal preference, and there's nothing much you can do. There are those others that, like, even if you don't agree with the majority of my review of like Song of Dryad, there still might be something in there that you're like, huh, that's actually a good point about fantasy. Yeah, that was my first experience. Oh, by the way, happy ending to the story. My professor, who is a published sci-fi author, loved my work, and actually to this day still uses my story as an example for his classes on how to properly write science fiction. That was my interaction with critique. And so I have felt really strange on AuthorTube due to the vast void within the realm of critique. Like, everyone on AuthorTube seems allergic to it, and it's very strange. It's very odd. You don't hear people talking, at least not in exact terminology about it. They don't talk about how they process it, because it's not a fun process. It's painful because you have to get to a point where you recognize that they are critiquing your work, not you. And that is hard to remember because we are humans and we have feelings and emotions. And so being able to distance yourself, go off to the side, have a cry, come back, like that whole process, it's an ugly process, but it's a necessary process because otherwise there's no way for our work to be better. Because let me tell you, by the end of that class, my short story was so much better than the first draft. I still have all my drafts saved. And there's a massive difference between the drafts, like massive. So I am a strong supporter of feedback. I think it's critical for the art. And yeah, anyway, I just wanted to share my experience with critique. It was a rough experience, but I feel like it was a really necessary one. I feel like if I hadn't had that experience, I would be a very different artist today. So even though it was rough, I'm glad it happened in a weird way. I wasn't at the time, but in retrospect, I'm glad it happened. I'm not saying that I feel like we should all be mean to each other and give like really vicious critiques. I just think that having an aversion to critique because you had a bad experience in the past is also not it. And I think the general feeling on this platform that's very almost anti-critique, anti-feedback, and any feedback is perceived as like you're being a negative Nancy. I find that really dangerous mentality when it comes to art, especially art that you're going to be charging money for. Please let me know if you have any stories like of stuff you went through in creative writing courses, stuff you went through in creative writing like groups or clubs or anything. Please let me know down below. I feel like all of us have had some kind of really negative or at the very least bizarre experience with another writer. So please let me know in the comments below what you guys have been through. I'm interested in seeing it. I know some people have some wild stories of stuff they've gone through. But yeah, at some point I do want to address like the whole community thing, but I kind of want to do that with another person, not just me talking. I hope everyone's doing well with their Preptober. I am not, yes, maybe. Anyway, happy almost November.